Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams carried classified intelligence that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. Officer Jake Morrison saw only a black man in uniform. The shooting took 18 seconds. The Pentagon generals arrived in 18 minutes, with federal warrants that would expose a conspiracy reaching deep into American law enforcement. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The summer heat clung to the asphalt like a suffocating blanket as Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams adjusted his rearview mirror. The classified briefing at the Pentagon still weighed heavily on his mind. Images of potential domestic terror cells, surveillance photos, and the gravity of what he'd learned about Operation Silent Shield. He was one of only 12 military personnel cleared to know the full scope of the investigation, and the manila envelope on his passenger seat contained intelligence that could prevent catastrophic attacks on American soil. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife Sarah. "Drive safe, honey. Maya's soccer game is at 6. Marcus smiled, thinking of his 8-year-old daughter's determined face as she charged down the field. He was supposed to be home in Richmond by 4, plenty of time to shower and change before becoming just another proud dad on the sidelines. The blue lights appeared in his mirror just outside Woodbridge, Virginia. Marcus felt his stomach drop, not from guilt but from the familiar dread that every black man in America knew. He was wearing his dress uniform, ribbons and all, driving a sensible Honda Accord exactly 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. His hands began to shake slightly as he pulled over, muscle memory from deployments in Afghanistan telling him that danger could come from anywhere. Officer Jake Morrison stepped out of his patrol car, hand already resting on his service weapon. At 34, Morrison had been with Woodbridge PD for 8 years, long enough to accumulate 17 complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, none of which had stuck, thanks to union protection and department politics. His pale blue eyes surveyed the scene with the predatory confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "License and registration," Morrison barked, not bothering with pleasantries as Marcus rolled down his window. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and respectful despite the rage building in his chest. "I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, U.S. Army. I was just returning from—" "I don't care what you were doing, boy. License and registration. Now." The word boy hung in the air like a slap. Marcus felt 15 years of military discipline warring with 15 years of being black in America. He reached slowly for his wallet, announcing each movement. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket, officer." Morrison's hand tightened on his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "My license is in my wallet, sir. I need to retrieve it." What happened next would be debated in courtrooms, congressional hearings, and news programs for months to come. Morrison would claim he saw Marcus reaching for something suspicious. The dash cam footage would show a decorated soldier complying with orders while trying to produce identification. The body camera Morrison wore would mysteriously malfunction at the crucial moment. The first shot hit Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him in his seat. The second caught him in the chest as he fell forward, his dress uniform ribbons now stained crimson. The manila envelope fell to the floor, its contents spilling across the car mat. Photos of suspected terrorists, classified intelligence reports, and a Pentagon directive marked, "Eyes Only, Operation Silent Shield." Morrison stood over the bleeding soldier, radio crackling as he called for backup and an ambulance, his voice steady as he began constructing his narrative. Shots fired, suspect down. Black male appeared to be reaching for a weapon. What Morrison didn't know was that Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams carried a GPS tracker in his military identification, standard protocol for personnel involved in classified operations. What he couldn't have imagined was that 3 Pentagon generals were already en route, having lost contact with Williams 20 minutes earlier when he'd failed to check in as scheduled. General Patricia Hayes, a steel-haired woman who'd broken more glass ceilings than she could count, sat in the passenger seat of the lead Humvee, her jaw set in a line that had intimidated senators and foreign diplomats alike. As the Judge Advocate General's Corps' most decorated officer, she'd seen enough military justice to know that civilian law enforcement was about to learn a very expensive lesson about federal jurisdiction. Beside her, General Robert Chin studied intelligence reports on his tablet, his weathered face betraying nothing of the storm brewing in his mind. 27 years in military intelligence had taught him to see patterns others missed, and the pattern here was crystal clear. One of his most valuable assets had just been neutralized by local law enforcement at the worst possible time. In the vehicle behind them, General Maria Rodriguez checked her service weapon and reviewed the federal warrants they carried. As head of Military Police Command, she'd dealt with jurisdictional disputes before, but never under circumstances this volatile. The sealed envelope in her briefcase contained not just arrest warrants, but evidence that would turn this shooting from a local incident into a federal case with national security implications. The convoy of 5 military vehicles arrived at the scene exactly 18 minutes after the shooting. Local police had barely established a perimeter when the Humvees rolled up like something from a war zone, drawing stares from gathering civilians and news crews who'd picked up the incident on scanner traffic. Chief David Patterson of Woodbridge PD felt his phone buzzing insistently as he watched uniformed soldiers deploy from the vehicles with military precision. At 52, he'd run what he considered a clean department, willfully blind to officers like Morrison who generated complaints faster than internal affairs could bury them. Now, as 3 generals strode toward him with purpose that brooked no argument, he realized his career was about to face its greatest test. Chief Patterson, General Hayes's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I'm General Patricia Hayes, JAG Corps. These are Generals Chen and Rodriguez. We're here regarding Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a local police matter. No, Chief, it's not. General Rodriguez stepped forward, producing a leather folder thick with documents. Staff Sergeant Williams is involved in a classified federal investigation. His shooting is now under federal jurisdiction. Patterson's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. My officer was conducting a routine traffic stop when... Your officer, General Chin interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, just shot a key witness in a domestic terrorism investigation. A witness carrying classified intelligence that 3 federal agencies have been waiting months to act upon. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, cell phone cameras capturing every word. Local news vans were arriving, their crews setting up for live broadcasts that would soon dominate national headlines. Social media was already exploding with shaky footage of the aftermath, #Justice for Marcus beginning to trend nationwide. Officer Morrison stood near his patrol car, still filling out his incident report with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this before. He looked up as the 3 generals approached, flanked by military police officers whose hands rested meaningfully on their sidearms. Officer Morrison, General Hayes's voice could have frozen fire. You're under arrest for assault on federal personnel, obstruction of a federal investigation, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice regarding interference with classified operations. Morrison's pen fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. What? You can't arrest me. I'm local law enforcement. This was a justified shoot. Actually, we can. General Rodriguez stepped forward with handcuffs. Staff Sergeant Williams is federal personnel engaged in classified duties. The Posse Comitatus Act has specific exceptions for cases involving national security, and this shooting has created a clear and present danger to ongoing federal operations. Chief Patterson moved to intervene. You can't just take my officer. Chief, General Chin produced another folder, this one marked with federal seals. This warrant gives us authority to seize all evidence related to this incident, including your officer, his weapon, vehicle, and any surveillance footage. We also have authorization to take control of the scene under federal jurisdiction. The transformation was swift and absolute. Within minutes, military police had secured the perimeter, federal crime scene investigators were documenting evidence, and Officer Morrison found himself in the back of a military transport vehicle, his Miranda rights read to him by a colonel who specialized in prosecuting war crimes. The local police stood by helplessly as their authority evaporated, replaced by the cold efficiency of military justice. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of what appeared to be a federal takeover of local law enforcement, exactly the kind of optics that would dominate cable news for weeks. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency room physician at Centara Northern Virginia Medical Center, had seen gunshot wounds before, but something about the patient wheeled into Trauma Bay 3 felt different. The man was unconscious but stable, his military uniform cut away to reveal the damage from .40 caliber rounds. What struck her wasn't just the wounds, but the obvious care with which paramedics had transported him, and the fact that armed federal agents now stood guard outside her trauma bay. Doctor, the lead agent approached her as she scrubbed out after surgery. How is he? Stable. The shoulder wound was through and through minimal damage. The chest wound missed his heart by inches but punctured a lung. He'll live, but recovery will take months. The agent nodded grimly. Ma'am, this patient is now under federal protection. No visitors without Pentagon clearance. No media, no local police, no one. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in the hospital conference room, General Hayes was briefing federal prosecutors via secure video link. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the shooting itself but the pattern of behavior that had led to it. Morrison's personnel file read like a blueprint for police misconduct. 17 complaints, 3 pending lawsuits, and a social media history filled with racist posts and extremist connections. The irony, General Chin explained to the prosecutors, is that Staff Sergeant Williams was investigating domestic terrorism networks with ties to white supremacist groups. His shooter appears to have connections to at least 2 organizations we've been monitoring. U.S. Attorney Sarah Michelle listened from her Washington office, already calculating the federal charges they could bring. Civil rights violations, federal assault, obstruction of justice, and if we can prove the connections to extremist groups, possibly domestic terrorism charges as well. The classified briefing room at the Pentagon was standing room only as military leadership gathered for an emergency session. General Hayes presented her findings with clinical precision, each slide revealing another layer of the crisis they now faced. Staff Sergeant Williams was carrying intelligence on Operation Silent Shield, she began, clicking to surveillance photos of suspected terrorists. 3 planned attacks on military installations, coordinated to coincide with the 4th of July weekend. Williams had just identified 2 key players in the network, information that dies with him if he doesn't survive. Defense Secretary James Morrison, no relation to the shooter, leaned forward in his chair. Status on the operation? General Chin answered grimly. Compromised. We have to assume hostile actors know we're onto them. The attacks may be moved up or the network may scatter. We're looking at a complete restart of an 18-month investigation. The room fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became clear. A routine traffic stop had potentially derailed a major national security operation, all because one racist cop couldn't see past the color of a soldier's skin. Outside the hospital, protest crowds were growing larger by the hour. #Justice for Marcus had exploded across social media, with celebrities, politicians, and activists demanding answers. Counter-protesters had also arrived, many carrying signs supporting law enforcement and questioning federal overreach. Reverend Michael Washington, a local civil rights leader, addressed the crowd through a bullhorn. This is about more than one shooting. This is about a system that allows racist officers to terrorize our communities while hiding behind badges and union protection. The response from law enforcement unions was swift and predictable. James Crawford, president of the Virginia Police Benevolent Association, held his own press conference. Officer Morrison was doing his job, following protocol in a dangerous situation. This federal takeover sets a dangerous precedent that undermines local law enforcement authority. But the federal evidence was damning. Morrison's social media history, subpoenaed within hours of the shooting, revealed connections to several extremist groups under FBI surveillance. Posts celebrating violence against minorities, shared memes from white nationalist websites, and private messages discussing taking matters into our own hands, painted a picture of radicalization that prosecutors would use to devastating effect. The breakthrough came on the second day, when Staff Sergeant Williams briefly regained consciousness. Heavily sedated and connected to machines, he managed to whisper critical information to General Chen about the terrorist network's leadership structure. 2 names, 2 locations, and a timeline that made everyone in the room realize they were running out of time. Move up the raids, General Hayes ordered. We hit all known locations simultaneously tonight. The coordinated federal operation swept through Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina like a hurricane. FBI, ATF, and military intelligence units struck 17 locations, arresting 12 suspects and seizing enough weapons and explosives to level several city blocks. The domestic terrorism network that Staff Sergeant Williams had spent months infiltrating was rolled up in a single night, but only because he'd survived long enough to provide the final pieces of intelligence. Officer Jake Morrison, meanwhile, sat in a federal holding cell at Quantico, his world collapsing around him as prosecutors outlined charges that could put him away for life. The federal public defender assigned to his case was already talking plea bargains, but Morrison's connections to the very terrorist network Williams had been investigating made any deal unlikely. Your client, U.S. Attorney Michelle explained to the defense counsel, wasn't just a racist cop having a bad day. He was a potential asset for domestic terrorists, whether he knew it or not. His social media activity, his targeting of military personnel, his pattern of violence, it all fits a recruitment profile we've been tracking for months. The revelation sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities nationwide. How many other officers were being cultivated by extremist groups? How many routine traffic stops were actually targeted harassment of military personnel? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found. 3 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams sat in his hospital bed, chest still bandaged but breathing on his own. His daughter Maya had drawn him pictures of superheroes, taped to the walls around his bed like a gallery of hope. His wife Sarah rarely left his side, her eyes carrying the haunted look of someone who'd nearly lost everything. General Hayes visited daily, partly for debriefing but mostly because she'd grown to respect the soldier who'd risked everything for his country, then nearly died because of the color of his skin. "The network's been dismantled," she reported during one visit. 17 arrests, 3 planned attacks prevented. "You saved lives, Sergeant." "A lot of lives." Marcus nodded weakly. "And Morrison?" "Federal grand jury indicted him yesterday. 47 counts, including civil rights violations, domestic terrorism conspiracy and federal assault. He's looking at life without parole." The trial of Officer Jake Morrison became a national spectacle, broadcast live on every major network. Prosecutors laid out a case that was part police brutality, part domestic terrorism, and entirely damning. Morrison's defense team tried to argue that he'd acted in good faith, following training and protocol, but the evidence of his extremist connections and pattern of racial targeting destroyed any claim of justified force. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. As Morrison was led away in shackles, his face showed no remorse, only the bitter anger of a man whose worldview had been shattered by accountability. Chief Patterson resigned in disgrace, his department placed under federal oversight pending a complete review of practices and personnel. 17 other officers were suspended pending investigation, their social media accounts and personal associations scrutinized for signs of extremist infiltration. The broader investigation revealed a network of corruption and racial bias that reached deep into Virginia law enforcement. Federal oversight expanded to 3 other departments, with mandatory training and monitoring imposed on dozens more. Staff Sergeant Williams eventually made a full recovery, though he carried scars both visible and invisible from that summer day. He testified before Congress about the intersection of domestic terrorism and police corruption, his uniform ribbons catching television lights as he spoke about the need for vigilance against enemies both foreign and domestic. Maya Williams, now 9, still believed her father was a superhero. Watching him on C-SPAN, speaking truth to power with the same quiet courage he'd shown in Afghanistan and that terrible traffic stop, she wasn't wrong. The Pentagon response had been swift, decisive, and ultimately successful. But the deeper questions lingered. How many other Marcus Williams were out there serving their country only to face danger from those sworn to protect and serve? How many terrorist networks were cultivating law enforcement sympathizers? How many routine traffic stops were anything but routine? General Hayes, now leading a joint task force on domestic extremism in law enforcement, kept a photo on her desk, Staff Sergeant Williams in his hospital bed, surrounded by his daughter's superhero drawings. It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the greatest threats to national security came not from foreign enemies, but from the corruption of American institutions by those who'd forgotten what they'd sworn to defend. The case became a landmark in federal law enforcement, establishing precedents for military intervention in cases where national security intersected with local police misconduct. The Morrison precedent, as legal scholars came to call it, fundamentally changed how federal agencies approached domestic terrorism investigations and police oversight. But for Marcus Williams, the real victory was simpler. He survived to see his daughter's next soccer game, to hold his wife through the nightmares that followed, and to continue serving a country that, despite everything, was still worth defending. The fight for justice wasn't over, it never really is. But on that summer day when Pentagon generals arrived with warrants and transformed a local shooting into a federal reckoning, America had taken a crucial step toward confronting the enemies within its own institutions. The badge was supposed to protect and serve. The uniform was supposed to defend the Constitution. When those symbols were corrupted by hate and extremism, it fell to other badges, other uniforms, and the unbreakable bonds of military brotherhood to restore justice and accountability. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams had carried classified intelligence that saved countless lives. But perhaps his greatest service was surviving long enough to expose the rot within, and to prove that sometimes, justice arrives with Pentagon generals and federal warrants, swift and absolute as military precision itself.